All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get started with this. It's Friday, everybody has a lot of stuff to cover before the weekend, but all of you guys know me. I mean, I've been here 50-something years. I've been a lawyer here in town for 40 years, and most of you have followed the trials and tribulations of our firm in dealing with international petrochemical industry tragedies, going back to ones in the 80s with Phillips, more recently, BP Texas City, where we had the lead counsel role in the 2005 explosion, the major roles we had in the BP oil spill, and the roles we've had in many of the other tragedies that seem to befall our petrochemical industry all too often. The purpose of calling this meeting today was several. There have been a lot of things that have happened over the last week that leave the community at large and the press in particular without facts that they need. And because we do this so often at so many different levels, we already know a lot of things. I'll tell you a little bit why we know a lot of those things. And I want to let you know more about a lot of the things that will be going on in the future from a litigation standpoint, from an investigative standpoint, and the health issues that many in the community are concerned about, as well as where they stand as a result of the explosion. I'm going to run through all of those. It will take probably 15 to 30 minutes to cover all that groundwork and get you guys up to speed. After that, I've got a couple of people that I want to introduce and have say a few other things, and I'm certainly free to ask and answer questions of you while we're here. And if any of you have more detailed questions or issues that you want to have flushed out more comprehensively after this meeting, I'm happy to stay around and answer those. First, I want to say a few things about who the major players are in this case. I don't know how many of you have followed explosions like this in detail, but what happened as a result of the explosion Wednesday is that a lot of things kick into gear. We have a command center in Beaumont, the emergency center for the Jefferson County, and other local authorities that have emergency management planning in the event of a catastrophe of this nature. It's not something that they don't plan for at some level. It remains to be seen as a result of this how good that planning is now that we've seen a major incident in our own backyard for the first time in a long time. So what we'll be doing as we go forward, and we encourage the press to follow, are all the things that the community should be interested in and the press should be interested in, and not only what happened in this occasion, what can be done to avoid it, why it happened this time, and how well the community is prepared for an incident like this again. And you know, if you want to look, for example, with what happened in with DuPont with BP Bhopal, the chemicals used there got out of containment and killed thousands of people in the community immediately adjacent to the facility. So the fact that this plant has been so disruptive to the community and forced an evacuation, which is a rare occurrence, I think it draws the attention to the fact that this is a very high risk deal. Most of the community and the media and others, community leaders, tend to think that what goes on inside the compound or the gates or the fence of a petrochemical plant stays there, and that the people that work out there take some degree of increased risk associated to their employment, that the community around it is generally safe. And we now know, again, that that's bullshit. That the things that happen in those plants not only put people at excess risk, but also the things that happen in that plant can also put the entire community at risk. And those are the things I hope the media takes with it when we leave here. And I'm going to go through a number of things that draw more attention to how high that risk is, what the health risks are now, and how close we came from this tragedy and what still some would even call a near miss as to something that could have had catastrophic implications to the entire community. Which is what precipitated some of the evacuation concerns. So in that vein, let me explain a few things to those that don't know a lot about what happens with these kinds of cases. I travel around the country doing this to the media in these other places that we do this work because the media in that area is very interested. This is the first time it's happened at this level in Southeast Texas here in Jefferson County in a long time. So it's not unfamiliar terrain for my law firm. It's certainly unfamiliar terrain for some of those in the press that don't normally follow this with a lot of detail. So in that vein, the first thing that happens after an explosion like this is a lot of things that trigger. First, we have, as I mentioned, the command centers in Beaumont and Jefferson County, the emergency management teams. The petrochemical plants involved have their own emergency management teams that kick into gear. Messaging begins to take place. There's a playbook basically a playbook of lines of communication of what the plant needs to do in response in terms of the chains of command that they report to upstream within their own hierarchy of the plant and their corporation back to their home office, and which stages of personnel involved in each of those levels of management need to then kick into gear their own communications. So plant managers locally are in charge of communicating to the local press, to the local community leadership, to the mayors and others, and serve as a point person to the state and federal investigative authorities. Upstream from there, you have other layers of the hierarchy of management responsible for communicating to state level people, the governors, and higher up from that in catastrophic events all the way to the White House and elsewhere. So that's how the hierarchy works. The feds and state involved players become ones that we see by acronym. So I want to refamiliarize yourself with some of them that you've heard of and probably some that you have not. Most typically you hear about OSHA. Everybody knows OSHA because they're well involved in general safety and health as a federal agency, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And what they generally do is kick the tires on employment places as well as plants. There's no comprehensive or very little comprehensive review of safety measures inside the petrochemical industry by OSHA from a prophylactic standpoint. They tend to come out more often after something's happened and investigate why it happened and look for infractions of OSHA regulations and initiate findings and opinions. So OSHA is out there now doing just that. You also then have TCEQ, Texas Commission, Texas Quality, TC, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They are the merger of Texas Water Commission and others. They basically come out and check on environmental emissions, water, other things that could be impacted from the chemicals that are released from these incidents. And I'll talk a little bit more in a little while about the chemicals that came out, what they are, what the risk factors are, both short-term in terms of what you call acute exposures, as well as long-term in what you call chronic exposures or latent disease processes that can emanate from them. You also have the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Again, that's another federal agency. They're involved in the investigative issues in this case and are participating. You also have one that many of you are probably not particularly familiar with, which is the CSB. The CSB, Chemical Safety Board, is abbreviation for United States Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. They are a very specialized subgroup of government agents and an agency that has a very focused responsibility. They only come in petrochemical incidents. They don't get involved in any other kinds of incidents. And they have people within that organization that specialize in just dealing with what happened in a petrochemical environment to cause an explosion. It's called a root cause analysis. So they go in and dial into not just what happened, but why it happened. And they don't just look at, well, it happened because something got out of containment and hit an ignition source. They go into why did it get out of containment? What was going on with trading with the personnel? What was going on with the integrity, the piping, P&ID issues? So they look at all of those issues and they come into a root cause analysis of this has multiple different causes due to a lax culture of safety. It has to do with too much concern about profitability and keeping the plants operating as opposed to routine maintenance. So they will come out with the ultimate findings in this case. They're taking a daily role in investigating this now over at Edson Plaza. They're visiting with people from all sides and people that were working out there and other people from basically a voluntary investigative standpoint. So we will anticipate that the CSB as really the best federal agency in coming to conclusions about what happened and why it happened. But we anticipate the typical role that we have with them is 6 months to a year down the road, seeing a preliminary report. There will be a town hall meeting where they will explain all that to you guys and the rest of the community. And then ultimately they'll come up with a final report that will be released, that will be their ultimate conclusions, as well as recommendations. And the goal of CSB is to identify why these happen, to communicate those to the industry at large, and hope that the industry takes that information with it and improves and self-regulates itself to reduce the risk down the road. That has historically met with mixed results, which is why we continue to have process safety containment problems that result in explosions around the country. So those are the agencies that are involved from an investigative standpoint right now. We are no doubt will have an independent investigation at some level from TPC, the plant that's involved. They're a relatively small organization. They're not like BP or ExxonMobil. They operate on a much smaller level with just a few operating plants. And interestingly, they're owned by a venture capital group. So how they handle this internally remains to be seen, and I'm not personally had experience in dealing with their facility or how they portray their investigative roles. We do know this generally, that whenever these kinds of incidents happen, and we see it all over the country where we work, the immediate and understandable reaction from a target defendant to litigation of this nature in the plant is to go into damage control. Lots of bad things can happen to them as a result of an explosion like this and a release of containment. OSHA can fine them. They can lose certain rights and lax oversight that they have and become much more scrutinized by federal agencies going forward. Rarely the Department of Justice and others get involved and even threaten other higher level criminal activity. We work very closely with the Department of Justice in Texas City to make sure that there were some criminal prosecutions in that case because of the egregious nature of the conduct that resulted in those fatalities. So all of those are out there. They also understandably look at the damage from civil litigation in addition to the criminal threats and citation. And the civil litigation is primarily what our firm does, as well as some of the other firms in the area and as well nationally. Those result in the claims by individuals associated to a wide scope of different